Good afternoon, Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, the diaspora, those logged on the World Wide Web, Facebook and YouTube. I am Nadia Frank John, and I am pleased to be your host tonight. You are tuned into the virtual public consultations for Scarborough Urban Redevelopment hosted by the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development. The business and construction industries and service sectors are here with us for the launch of this event. This is a place to be once you have Tobago's development at heart. What else is on tonight? Nothing should separate Tobagonians from this event. We do at this point, though, apologize for the delay in the start of the event, but we promise an insightful and wonderful time. Tonight's dialogue is going to be informative and insightful. We have a distinguished set of panelists which will stir rich discussion. So we encourage you, the audience, you on Zoom, on Facebook and YouTube, not just to participate, but we ask you to participate. Let's head right to the stage to our panelists. Tonight, we have Joshua Stott, the lead architect, Dr. Vanus James, renowned economist, Dr. Ellis Boris, specialist engineer and technical advisor to the division, Miss Salisha Duke, project manager with the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, and Mr. Alvin Thompson, urban planner, joining us via Zoom. At this time, we would like to recognize the presence of our dignitaries on Zoom. The Honorable Farley Augustine, Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Assemblymen Trevor James and Joel Sampson, Secretary and Assistant Secretary of the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, other Assemblymen and Councillors, Administrator of the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, Mr. Richie Toppin, members of the business and construction service sectors, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, you too are VIP, members of the media. Welcome, welcome one and all. If you are viewing via Facebook or YouTube and would like to get a closer connection with our panelists, now is your time to get in on Zoom. WhatsApp the line 73 works, that is 739-6757, powered in part by B-Mobile. Life is on. We're going to take a quick break. So get a glass of water, get comfortable and stay tuned. You're watching the virtual consultations for the Scarborough Urban Redevelopment. We'll be back in a quick minute. And we're back. You tuned into the virtual consultations for the Scarborough Urban Redevelopment. We're going to head straight into the presentations, starting with Miss Salisha Duke. Over to you, Miss Duke.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank John. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists. Good afternoon to Facebook. Good afternoon to our stakeholders, all our dignitaries locked on. Good afternoon, Tobago. My task this afternoon is very simple, and that is to bring into context this grand infrastructure development project for Scarborough. Scarborough, as we know it, is the largest town and capital of Tobago and is situated on the southwestern end of Scarborough. Our capital has a long and storied history and is surrounded by many historical elements. Scarborough possesses the characteristics of a typical island town and is considered the administrative and commercial center of Tobago. As like most of us, the Executive Council of the Tobago House of Assembly recognizes the deteriorating urban fabric of Scarborough, and the general consensus speaks to the urgent need for the rehabilitation of our capital. Therefore, they have decided that an intentional effort must be made to reverse the negative effects of the inefficiencies plaguing our capital, Tobago. Some of the stakeholders may remember, under the Office of the Chief Secretary, through the Scarborough Enhancement Program, which started just around 2010, led the charge to improve the urban design of Scarborough, including the aesthetics, road network system, physical layout of the city. This program realized some gain in its early presentation, such as the construction of the Northside Connector Road, the removal of some dilapidated structures, restoration of the amphitheater, among others. However, in 2022, when we think of Scarborough or the mention of our capital, it almost always leads to a less than favorable conversation about its aging and dysfunctional physical environment. Though some elements of modernization can be noticed here and there, it is still very evident that old or poorly maintained buildings are there, unsightly hanging utility lines, undeveloped or poorly maintained lands, poor urban connectivity, minimal recreational spaces are present in Scarborough. The conversation would also go in the direction of inadequate transportation network system. And this speaks to the road network being incapable of supporting the growth in population, incapable of supporting our increased usage of personal vehicles, incapable of our new development in Scarborough. Inadequate transport network system also speaks to the congestion, traffic congestion, lack of parking facilities, and our not too reliable public transportation. Conversations would also tend to go in the direction of our underdeveloped port. We all know all too well that our port cannot accommodate more than one cruise line at a time. Worse than that, while a cruise ship is in harbor, our domestic vessels cannot come in. Underdevelopment also speaks to us missing the opportunity to explore the possibility of a container port to support import and export activities in our capital. The conversations most time also go in the direction that Scarborough has become a less than attractive location to do business, and therefore the business sector may go into a location that is more feasible to operate. Stakeholders, Tobago, we are here to say, let us renew our vision for Scarborough. Let us confront these long-standing deficiencies head-on and start the dialogue to define what this grand infrastructure project will be. Our capital should be our engine room to boost our economy. And therefore, with this development, a well-designed and functional Scarborough will encourage our private sector investment to lead job creation. A well-developed cruise ship and container port can advance our drive to transform the economy through export and import and the ability to accommodate more than one cruise line at any one time. A great improvement in traffic network should also be achieved. This development, without a doubt, would create an environment to improve the quality of life for residents and also increase the value of properties in and around our city. Stakeholders, this is essentially a participatory process. We want to ensure that our vision is aligned with your vision as we work to make this city one of the greatest cities in the region and by extension, the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Salisha, for your presentation. Now, some of you may be wondering, who is Salisha Duke? Let me give you a little bit of her history. Salisha Duke is a project coordinator in the Urban Development Department of the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and Urban Development. She has been employed with the Tobago House of Assembly for over 13 years. 11 of those she served in the capacity of project manager. She has managed projects at the Office of the Chief Secretary, with latest being the expansion of the Calder Hall Administrative Complex and the PRDI refurbishment. She is the holder of an MSc in Project Management and Evaluation from the University of the West Indies, a Bachelor's of Business Administration with a concentration in Finance and Human Resource Management from the University of New Brunswick, and a Technician's Diploma in Construction from the City and Guild. Coming up next, we have the young architect, causing quite a stir on the front line. It's truly an exciting time for our young professionals. Joshua Stewart was born and bred in Tobago, is our own, as we say. His work of art and functionality presented to us today will be one to think on. Before that, let's take a quick break. See you in a bit. I'm not hearing anything in the earpiece. Welcome back, viewers. You're tuned into the virtual consultations for Scarborough Urban Redevelopment by the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and Urban Development, and powered in part by B-Mobile. Life is on. Poised to lead us at this time is the lead architect, Mr. Joshua Stewart. Mr. Stewart is a RIBA chartered architect and the principal of J-Metrics Limited. He is a highly motivated and creative architect with over 20 years experience in the built environment. Stewart is knowledgeable in international building codes and systems with a wealth of experience as a lead architect and design coordinator for small and major design projects. These roles allowed him to be involved in all phases of design, client presentations, contract administrations, and the construction processes with various consultants under very tight schedules. His work celebrated the innovative use of local building materials, methodologies, and materials to achieve ultra-modern designs. His design approval evolves with time and responds to the needs and context whilst transforming lives through beauty and interior design. Attention to detail helps to deliver well-crafted and quality projects at the highest possible standard to his clients. Some of his projects that he has worked on includes the FCB Scarborough branch, Brian Lara Stadium, Luxury Villas, Cabildo Chambers, and Red House. Joshua is also a former national under-19 cricketer. His interests are architectural photography, traveling, and music. Wow, that is indeed a noteworthy achievement. And we will hear from Joshua now as he presents his take on a redeveloped Scarborough.
Thank you, Ms. Frank. Pleasant good afternoon to my fellow panelists, all the stakeholders, and all the viewers around the world. Yes, as Ms. Frank said, my name is Joshua Stewart. I was given the privilege to be the lead architect for the Scarborough Development Plan. As we all know, the redevelopment of Scarborough is long overdue, and I was approached 1 year ago by the current administration to do a visualization of their plans for the redevelopment of Scarborough. So the following presentation will illustrate the preliminary design and the processes for the redevelopment plan of Scarborough. So the aim is to reclaim 38 acres of land on the beachfront where the existing port facilities are in order to expand additional berths for additional cruise ships to be docked into Scarborough. The reclaimed land will help alleviate the issue of negotiating with existing landowners so we can achieve the redevelopment of Scarborough. The waterfront will have amusement parks, a new terminal hub for the additional cruise ships. This terminal will have duty-free shops, museums, commercial spaces, and activities for both visitors and locals. The existing terminal will be relocated in order to expand the existing port area. And also there will be a marina where the existing fishing dock are. Also, near the Botanical Gardens, there will be a new transport hub with a skywalk connecting the 5-story car park. This transport hub will facilitate all the domestic traffic, buses and taxis, and also there will be parking for local residents. So this is showing an overview of Scarborough. So we have the water park, which is lower down Breeze Hall Mall side. Then you have the terminal, the new terminal complex to accommodate the influx of people. Then you have the domestic terminal, Then we have the transportation hub, which is where the former Scotiabank office was. Also, we plan to redevelop the green spaces within the city. So where Light and Life Secondary School exists, we're going to do a redevelopment where we have pedestrianized areas and also access from the port all the way to Claude Noel Highway. So that's the area highlighted there where we're going to do the urban park, student park in that area. Also where Tiantec is located currently, we're going to relocate Tiantec to Cove, and we're going to have a civic center to house all the government offices and agencies in that area. We're also going to add a new roundabout where Light and Life is, connecting the highway to Light and Life for safety purposes, and also there will be a housing development on the opposite side of the highway. This is essential as we develop the city. As I can recall Mr. Leacock stating that we need residents living in the city in order to develop and enhance Scarborough. So that's the area for the new housing development. Also, there will be a direct connection between the new reclaimed land going all the way through Smithfield, through Light and Life, and over the highway connecting the new housing development. Also, these additional infrastructure will help to deal with the traffic issue that we currently have in Scarborough. There will be additional 290 housing units, as well as hotels and shops in that new development. So this is the connection between the new housing project that leads all the way down to the proposed port development. So this is just an overview of the entire master plan. You're going to have water parks, new terminal complex, 2 additional piers to accommodate 2 additional mega ships. Also, we're going to redevelop the domestic ferry terminal as well. Also, the historical James Park and Uptown Scarborough will also be restored to reflect its history. Also, in the new development, there will be a lot of pedestrianized areas, as currently Scarborough is lacking a lot of, it's not user-friendly for pedestrians. So our proposal will enhance the usability of Scarborough. So in terms of the way forward, so this was the initial concept done based on the current administration's vision for Scarborough. So phase 1, moving forward, there will be market research done by an international company, the name of Hamburg. So their role and purpose is to look at the cruise market analysis, defining the number of cruise passengers and cruise vessels to be expected in the next 20 years. This analysis will determine the size of the terminal and also the number of piers required for today and for the future. Their research will also contain what kind of cruise port brand should be communicated to the cruise industry throughout the Caribbean. So their job includes intense communication with the different Tobago tourism bodies and agencies. Also, we have a port architect who will be on the team, RHWZ Architects from Germany. They are specialized in waterfront port designs and international ship and port facility security. As we all know, the cruise business has an enormous impact on the accessibility of public space. So they're going to work out the functionality, the logistical and security aspect, such as considered in the ISPS code. ISPS stands for International Ship and Port Facility Security. They will also deal with the logistical issues, boarding and deboarding, luggage, transport and landside supply of ships, the handling of traffic around the cruise terminal, and the intersection of urban, public ways, and security areas. We also have a port engineer on board, Inros Lackner. All these companies, you can see their information online. They will assess the present state and potential of the shoreline and available port infrastructure. They're going to identify key physical design conditions, and their involvement will ensure that the cost is manageable in the design phase of the process. Also, although I'm appointed the lead architect for the Scarborough Development Plan, there are other young, talented designers in Tobago, such as Kevin Roy, Cullen Duke, Nikisha Porter. These are very talented architects who will be a part of this process. So I was selected by the THA based on my international experience and the connections I had. And I was able to put a team together which is more than capable of delivering a first-class international standard Scarborough Development Plan for the people of Tobago. Thank you.
Mr. Stewart's presentation was one that was filled with information. A lot of you are trying to digest it. I can imagine some of you are wanting to see the presentation so you can go over it a little more. And we are here to facilitate all your needs. So whatever your need is, we will be here to give you the information that you need so that you can ask the appropriate question, give the input that we need so that we can advance this design. If you are pleased thus far with the information that you have heard, there are things that you like, you feel optimistic about a new Scarborough, just send some hearts, give us some thumbs up, send a quick comment, like and share the feed. Those of you on the Zoom link, if you would like, you can also parallelly watch us on Facebook and YouTube as we sort out your technical difficulties. If you're now joining us, you've missed something in your life, but we've got you. These lives will be available on Facebook, on our Facebook pages and YouTube. Up next, these professionals need no introduction. Our very own Vanish James, renowned economist, presenting on infrastructure and development of the Tobago economy. Stay glued to your seats and locked into your screens. It's the virtual public consultation for Scarborough urban redevelopment. We'll be right back.
Get some more malls in Scarborough. Beautiful food places, like we can have a bit more choices to make as it relates to different types of foods. Now when you visit countries like the United States and certain malls, you see that they have a variety to choose from. So sometimes you come from work and you just don't have that energy to go home and cook. And you really would like to get that nice salad bar. And as it relates to breakfast, if you could have some more breakfast sheds in Scarborough, that also would help a lot.
We're talking redevelopment of Scarborough. Taking the mic now is Dr. Vanus James. Dr. Vanus James is a former Senior Policy Advisor, UNDP, and World Intellectual Property Organization International Consultant. That's a lot to say. He also served as a Senior Research Fellow in the Scotiabank Chair in Entrepreneurship and Development and as an Adjunct Distinguished Professor of Economics and Econometrics at the University of Technology, Jamaica. Dr. James is the author of 3 WIPO reports measuring the contribution of copyright-based industries in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and the OECS, as well as author of the UNEC LAC Manual, the Design and Conduct of Public Expenditure Reviews in the Caribbean Countries. He is also the co-author of the recently published book, Competing for Development, Perspectives on Self-Sustaining Growth for the Caribbean Economies. The central thesis of this published works is referred journals and books is the main development problem for the Caribbean countries is that the domestic capital sector is too small. Dr. James, we welcome you.
Thank you, host, and let me begin by saying hello to the people of Tobago, locally in Trinidad and in the diaspora. And let me thank the division and I think the Chief Secretary is in the audience. Let me thank him too for inviting me to participate in this forum. I take my responsibility in Tobago as that of keeping the people's feet firmly anchored to the ground in confronting their responsibilities to develop the Tobago space. And I would execute that mandate here in the forum this evening. Let me also say hello to my fellow panelists. If I had the money, Joshua, I would buy your port and hand it to the people of Tobago free. But I don't have the money. And my job is to ask money questions about the proposed project. Let me begin by pointing out that economic development in Tobago is an urgent priority for the people here because of the facts of our condition. Tobago is in a relatively underdeveloped state compared with the nation as a whole, and of course in the general framework of the world economy. We produce here about $3,400 US per person per year. And much of that output and all of the imports that we live on in Tobago is financed by transfers from Trinidad. And without those transfers, as we were recently reminded by the Prime Minister himself, without the transfers, the Tobago economy would collapse in short order. Tobagonians must be realistic about that fact and the demand it places on us to move urgently to develop our economy, to escape that dependence, to get out of that dependence on Trinidad. If you compare Tobago with Trinidad and Tobago produces $16,129 per person per year. That's about 5 times what Tobago produces. And if you compare Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago with the countries in the world that are classified as developed, they produce about $50,726 per person on average among all of them, 24 of them. I can show you with basic algebra that if we were to grow the GDP per capita of Tobago at 8% or so per year, it would take somewhere in the region of 20 years for Tobago to catch up with where Trinidad and Tobago is today. And it would take Tobago 35 years to get to the 50,000 or so US dollars per person that the developed economies currently deliver. Now, if you take careful account of the current state of Tobago's investment financing capacity, the capacity to fund Joshua's project included, it is perhaps more realistic to target a slower annual growth of GDP per capita for Tobago, say 4%, when I do my calculations. If Tobago was to grow at that slower rate, it would take us just under 40 years to achieve the current GDP per capita of the nation. And it would take 69 years to achieve the current GDP per capita, meaning the average standard of living, delivered by developed economies. That should tell Tobagonians and the division of infrastructure that development in and of itself is difficult business. Now, the international evidence that I study for WIPO and other agencies tell me that if Tobago is to develop, it must invest to do 4 things simultaneously, which is what makes development difficult. First, it must grow the capital share of its GDP. That includes growing through the investment in projects like the one Joshua is championing here today. It must simultaneously improve the quality and effectiveness of its institutions, including the THA as government, and including, for that matter, whatever the central government is doing here. Tobago must also simultaneously improve its capacity to innovate and bring new solutions to problems in the local marketplace, thrown up by the international marketplace, and so on. And we must also generate investments that grow the average productivity of labor in all our key industrial sectors, including agriculture and government. Government in Tobago is notoriously low productivity, as one of our distinguished professors, Rita Pemberton, warned us about a year and a half ago in the Scarborough Library. Now, when I talk about growing the capital share of Tobago's GDP, I'm talking about growing the share of the output that the economy produces that's used again as an input in the production of all other things. And in that context, infrastructure creation is an important and indeed a quintessential form of capital output. That is the way Tobagonians need to understand the project being proposed for the redevelopment of the capital city by Joshua and his team. Now, those facts that I have laid out for you there have at least two implications of importance to the divisions of Tobago of government in Tobago that are responsible for infrastructure development in Tobago, where we take infrastructure as an important part of the capital output of Tobago's economy. Once the THA works out a framework approach to development of the Tobago economy, the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, would be responsible to identify and scale the infrastructure projects, and let me be more careful and say the hard infrastructure projects that are needed to support that development agenda that Tobago will undertake. So you could see in that context why the port city is relevant. Now, those are the hard infrastructure things relating to roads and bridges, telecoms, airports, seaports, waterways, and physical facilities for other industries to operate with, and so on, like carnival infrastructure and all of that. But there is a broad range of associated vital, soft, and green infrastructure investments, like social and economic statistics collection, education reform, environmental conservation measures, which are not the responsibility of the Division of Infrastructure, and which we don't talk about in these consultations here, but which will factor seriously in any proper assessment of the place the hard infrastructure projects, including the port city, should hold in the affordable priorities of Tobago today. Now, this proposed capital city being put to the public by the Division of Infrastructure fits into the responsibility of the division to the people. And there is a sense in which this general idea makes broad economic and social sense. But it's important to observe that when a proposed project such as this is brought to the public, the most realistic approach to be adopted by the division that would allow the public to assess whether or not to support it should include a basket of data that the people must be given. One of them is, what would this project cost us? What are the expected capital inputs? Other types of inputs, labor requirements, and so on. What would the project cost in terms of resources? What are the outputs the project would generate for us? What are the expected development outcomes that this project would deliver in terms of productivity, institutions, savings, other capacity building that the project could perhaps deliver, and so on? What is the impact of the project in the sense of new capabilities that would be generated that would not be generated if the project was not done? The project sounds like a good project, but the division is well advised to be as transparent as possible in giving the public the information it needs to assess the proposal, even if it takes some time to do so. Furthermore, the case for the city should not be viewed purely as a technical feasibility matter. Joshua can build a port city. But there is more to it than that. If you want to develop a port city in Scarborough, a city of government in Scarborough, so to say, you may well be justified to do so because we have a lot of good examples of that in Brasilia, in Brazil, Washington, D.C., in the U.S., and so on. And there is some logic to having that kind of city to prevent clutter with the other industries that we are going to develop here in Tobago. So there is some sense in going down that road. But I want to also suggest to the division that public expectations matter, and they particularly matter in political terms. So the data that I suggested you should bring to the public would go a long way to enabling the leadership of Tobago and the public to gauge whether the project can be afforded and should be given priority over other important infrastructure projects like education and healthcare reform, green infrastructure reform, and so on, to enable us as a people to deal with climate mitigation and plastics pollution. In other words, summarily, Joshua, we need your data and we need other information if we, the people, are to put ourselves in a position to judge whether to support the project or not. That would be my contribution, Madam Chair.
Well, there you have it in a nutshell. All the strong economic reasons to support these initiatives for Tobago's progress. And that will explain to you that it is not a utopian dream, but one that has to be worked through. I am sure that our participants are waiting with bated breath to pose their questions, and we're almost there. We'll take a 30-second break, and when we come back, we'll hear from Specialist Engineer and Technical Advisor to the Division, Dr. Ellis Boris. See you in a bit. If you're just joining us, you've missed something in your life, but we've got you. These lives will be available on our Facebook pages. We're back and our heirs are trained on the panel tonight, who have begun to lay out the case for a redeveloped Scarborough. We now turn to Dr. Ellis Boris. Dr. Ellis Boris, presently a specialist engineer and the technical advisor in the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development. Formerly, he served as the CEO of the Water and Sewage Authority, Permanent Secretary of Government Ministries in Trinidad and Tobago, Chief Administrator of the Tobago House of Assembly, Administrator of Divisions in the Tobago House of Assembly. In the Division of Infrastructure and Public Utilities, he served as Technical Officer, Chief Construction Engineer, and Civil Engineers 1 and 2. Dr. Boris is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts, Washington University at St. Louis, Missouri, and the University of Strathclyde, Glasgow in the UK. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. He holds a master's degree in structural engineering, and he holds a PhD in civil engineering, specializing in coastal engineering, ports, and harbor development. Dr. Boris was granted a Presidential Award, Gold, for meritorious performance in the public service. He is a fellow of the Association of Professional Engineers of Trinidad and Tobago and a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Dr. Boris has served as an auxiliary member of the Baha'i Faith in Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, serving for the past 7 years as Chairman of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Trinidad and Tobago. He obtained a fellowship from the Organization of American States to pursue his master's in structural engineering in the United States of America. He is also a member of the Tau Beta Pi in the United States Honor Society for Engineers. Dr. Boris, we welcome you.
Thank you very much, host. I want to pay my respect to the listeners on Facebook and YouTube, the listeners here in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to pay special respect to the Chief Secretary who is also listening, and the Secretary for Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, and this administrator also. So against that background, we want to move straight into what I am here to do. What is important at this point in time is that we are moving on to our next level of development. And engineers and architects and all those persons who are on board are going to make this happen. Scarborough has moved from a village, and in 1769 it was made the town of Tobago, and now this assembly is moving it into a city. For many decades, the town of Scarborough remained unchanged. In Scarborough's the central, there was one main street called Carrington Street. There was an old port wall. I sometimes wonder why it was there. It was unplastered and it marked stick no bills. It was blocks of 16 by 8 by 4, like partition blocks. And it was there very, very, very untidily looking. Scarborough was a rundown town, and the visitors would ask when they come into Scarborough, where's Scarborough? And Scarborough there not looking so well. Then in around 2010, I remember well, around the area of the First Citizen Bank going towards the Scarborough Market, it was pretty smelly. And the situation continued even into the area where they had, we have relocated the taxi stand from Carrington Street onto Lower Castries Street. And a migrant person was seen urinating at the back there. It stirred whosoever saw it, and it creates a trigger. In 2010, at that same time, we asked for the Scarborough reorganization and a redevelopment. In that process, approximately $21 million was pumped into Scarborough to do some improvement work in various areas. Building, for example, the North Side Road connector, the street that comes off Cornwall Highway onto Gardner Side Street, the murals on the walls, on the north walls of the Gardner Side Street, demolition of Scarborough Port Wall and reconstruction thereof, the amphitheater refurbishment, removal of the interlocking blocks down on the Scarborough Esplanade, which was pretty unsightly and uncomfortable for pedestrians, the restoration of the Scarborough old courthouse building, where the Works Division had occupied, the restoration of the Botanic Garden fence and the passage of on the North Side Connector Road. We purchased equipment for the office, and we moved forward with making Scarborough a little better. We had to also demolish a few buildings in town. Dock Workers was one of them. We also had to remove some flea markets that were growing up on the Melford Road and at the Wilson Road corner to prevent the rundown look of Scarborough. It was done, and it made Scarborough look a little better. But at least Tobagonians are pretty unsatisfied with what has happened, and the last situation is that the people have voted for an improvement of Scarborough according to what was put to them a few months ago. And it was Mr. James, Trevor James, the Secretary for Infrastructure, Quarry and Urban Development, who triggered the development process, which is now in process at this point in time. What the lead architect has put together is a significant drive to make Scarborough a better town. We want to bring Scarborough up to the standard to compete with Bridgetown, Kingston, St. George's, Port of Spain, San Fernando. These are the towns that we have to compete with, the city that we have to compete with to make Scarborough a respectable city in the Caribbean. The rollout for the city is an essential part of the operation. It is like preparing a new place for better things to come. If you are living in a house that is run down, you will try to make sure that you do some improvement works. So parallel to living in the house, you are doing improvement work. That is what is going to happen in Scarborough City. We will still have the city running and operating, and the parallel works must go alongside of what is going to take place. That's the rollout process that is required. We know for a city, a growing city, as articulated by the lead architect, that we will have increased population in the city. We have to ensure that our water systems, our electricity, our telephone systems would be on par to ensure a comfortable life in the city. What we are doing again is to ensure that we remain within the ambits of the law, because that's a challenge that we have to face. Because if we are doing, when you have a tight area, it is important to understand that the buildings will have to go up. Scarborough is a very tight area with respect to space for the development that we want to do. So it's expected that we'll have a few buildings that will go beyond the normal height of the buildings in Scarborough at this point in time. So against that background, I'm just trying to bait the architect into understanding that that should be done and must be thought of. As we roll out into the operation, we expect that the proposed city, we will have land reclamation as stated earlier, increased berthing facilities for vessels of different sizes, hotel and duty-free shops in the area, the rollout of a transport hub, which is essential to any city, extension of the waterfront facilities going down towards from Gomes, going down back to Lambo River. We need to do some improvement work in the area to ensure that we have leisure space for the people of Tobago and our visitors. The building rollout. We have, as I said earlier, the multi-story buildings that have to be built because of the situation with this land space. So wherever we have land space, it's expected that we have to go up a little higher than what we are at this point in time to ensure that the convenience of the city, the roadways, and the habitation of the city are comfortable. We also have to ensure that our road connections are intact. As indicated, we are going to make some connections with Smithfield and Montgomery and all those places to ensure a smooth flow of the traffic within the city itself. So as the plans are drawn and the analyses are done, we are hoping that all will understand and bear patience with whatsoever developmental work has to be done. We will ensure that the pedestrian pathways are protected and people during the time of construction are well protected, vehicles movement and vehicles parked. will also be safely protected under the arrangement that we're going to put in place. So against that kind of arrangement, we are hoping to make sure that Scarborough become one of the bustling cities in the Caribbean. We are going to have the Executive Council, all the drawings and design that has to be done in Scarborough has to be approved by the Executive Council. And after the approval of the Executive Council, those programs will be rolled out. The point is you cannot do all the construction work simultaneously. You have to phase the developmental process. And at this point in time, if we have an overhaul or a global plan, we can start putting in place those small items, those low-hanging fruits that will be capable of making the tongue a little bit more comfortable at this present time, and going forward to when the significant rollout of the larger buildings and further infrastructures that are required to make Scarborough a better town. We are determined, and the people of Tobago are determined, that Scarborough should be a better place. And if it takes all that we have, our attention, our strength, our dedication, our determination, we are determined to build Scarborough block by block, brick by brick, parks by parks, road by roads, building by buildings, to make Scarborough a better town. Thank you.
What a time we're having here at this virtual consultation for the Scarborough urban redevelopment. We just heard from specialist engineer Dr. Boris on a practical approach to phasing the project. He indicated that we'll be working and living in the city, and it is a good time for development in Scarborough. Our next panelist is Dr. Alvin Thompson, based now in Canada. He has joined us via Zoom and will be presenting on towards new institutional arrangements for city governance, the case of Scarborough, Tobago. We'll be back in 30 seconds, so stay tuned. Hello again, Tobago, Trinidad, the diaspora. Our topic tonight is envisioning a new Scarborough, and with it will come some arrangements for governance. All hands will be needed for this deck. Dr. Alvin Thompson will explain. Dr. Alvin Thompson grew up in the village of Delaford in northeastern Tobago. His interest in urban planning focuses primarily, but not exclusively, on housing and human settlement. More recently, his research work has focused on governance response to the impacts of sea level rise on coastal cities. Dr. Thompson, in the past, worked as a land use planner for the Division of Planning and Development in the Tobago House of Assembly. Dr. Thompson is currently a postdoctoral fellow in the Faculty of Applied Sciences, Center of Interactive Research on Sustainability at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. In his current work, he uses social ecology system thinking as an entry point to study how global and local drivers of climatic and environmental change create multiple impacts on coastal systems and littoral communities. Relatedly, his work draws on governance research, particularly in the genre of environmental governance, to study how legislative and policy arrangements could enable or constrain adaptation to the impacts of climate change. His most recent publication, entitled Challenges and Opportunities for Integrating Coastal Water Quality Management, a case study of the Bucco Reef Marine Protected Area, is published in Caribbean Geography. In April of this year, Dr. Thompson will be presenting his current work on coastal governance at the 14th International Conference on Climate Change, Impacts and Responses in Vancouver, British Columbia. Dr. Thompson, we welcome you.
Thanks for your kind introduction, Madam Host. You did say that I am not in Tobago. Unlike you, you are enjoying that warm, nice weather. I am domiciled here in Canada, where it's about -4 degrees today. And you are in beautiful Tobago, but I'm in Tobago in heart. You know, I'm a Tobagoan at heart, and I think that I have a contribution to make to these proceedings. Let me take the opportunity first to say good evening to the Honorable Chief Servant, as I like to call the Chief Secretary, my fellow Easterner, Fali Chavez Agustin. I also want to acknowledge my friend, the Secretary Responsibility for Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment, Dr. Trevor James, Mr. Trevor James, I should say. I also think on the line there is the Assistant Secretary, Assemblyman Joel Sampson, the Administrator in the division, Mr. Toppin. I see some other colleagues that I know, the Director of TEMA, Mr. Alan Stewart, a former colleague of mine, Bobby Andrews. I see the Director in the Land Management, Ms. Cherise Wallace, and a few other people who perhaps I don't know. When I was preparing, let me just share my screen. Just share my screen with you. So when I was preparing my presentation, I wondered, who should I be presenting to? I knew I would have a large audience of Tobagonians, of course, but I wondered who should be my focus? Who should I present to? And I heard a little voice telling me, Alvin, present to young Tobagonians. This is a bold plan. All right, most of us, all of us grew up in a Tobago, and I'm sure we've had dreams of what Scarborough could look like. But we have grown older, and Scarborough still looks the same. So my presentation this evening is really a presentation to the young Tobagonians who are dreaming of a Tobago that they could spend their perhaps entire life in and aspire to the dreams that they have and their parents and grandparents perhaps could not aspire to. All right, so my topic is entitled Towards New Institutional Arrangements for City Governance, the case of Scarborough, Tobago. So I want to start, I'm big on definitions because I like to defend my work. So bear with me as I go through about 2 or so slides of definitions, and then I get into the meat of my presentation. So what do I mean by institutional arrangements? So I've gotten these definitions from the UN, and I want to read that's the first one. It says, institutional arrangements are the policies, the systems and processes that organizations use to legislate, to plan and manage their activities efficiently and to effectively coordinate with others in order to fulfill their mandate. Institutional arrangements refer to formal governance organizational structures, as well as informal norms, which are in place in a country for arranging and undertaking its policy work. All right. So what is the focus of my presentation? All right, I have 2 primary focuses or foci this evening in my presentation. One is to unpack some key concepts for thinking about the distinctions between government and governance. Sometimes we tend to use those terms interchangeably. And the main focus of my presentation really is to advance 5 key questions that could serve to guide the discussions tonight and going forward on a new governance model for Scarborough. So just bear with me again as I make some key distinctions between some concepts that we will use tonight going forward. So what do I mean by government? When I use the term government, I mean legislative, judicial, and policymaking arenas. All right. I also use the term government to represent arenas of authority within a particular jurisdictional limit. All right. If I use my second definition as a jumping off point, I could then identify three main types of government. All right. One, with multiple centers of authority. I refer to this type as a polycentric type of government. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we do have a polycentric model. We have what we call national government. We have in the THA what some persons refer to as quasi-national or sub-national government. All right. And we have in Trinidad municipalities or municipal government. All right. So we have three different levels. So I call that polycentric, or governance scholars refer to that as polycentricity or polycentric government. The next level is dual centers of authority, and we refer to this as dual centricity. All right. What we are trying to build out in Tobago now is two levels of government. The THA, or a government for the city of Scarborough. All right. So then we'll have two centers. We'll have the THA and the city of Scarborough. All right, and single centers of authority. And the classic case now is the Tobago House of Assembly. Essentially, the Tobago House of Assembly is the only authority now that has the responsibility for lawmaking, Tobago laws, and for policy making for the entire island of Tobago. So what do I mean by governance? You know, governance has become a very nebulous term. You know, it's like a road march. Governance for everything. You know? I draw on my definition from Koyman and Banvinik, and they're writing in the genre of environmental governance. And for them, governance is the whole of public as well as private interactions taken to solve societal problems and to create societal opportunities. It includes the formulation and application of principles, guiding those interactions and the care for institutions that enable them. All right. We also use governance as a synonym for governing. All right, governance, the noun governing the verb. All right, so my use of it tonight is interactions that are related to collective decision-making processes. All right, jumping off from that definition, I could identify three types of these interactions or what they occur. They occur within governance arenas or government arenas. They occur outside of those arenas. And they occur across government arenas and other arenas. So, using my last slide, I have developed what I call a typology of governance interactions. All right, so I've identified 5 basic typologies. The first one is what I call legislative interactions. All right. These are interactions between those who have the authority to make laws. So, for example, in parliamentary debates. Second one is executive interactions between those who have the authority to formulate policies. For example, policy deliberations in the Tobago House of Assembly's Executive Council. The third one is judicial interactions, and these are interactions in the legislature. In the judiciary, sorry. And the last one is, the fourth one is community interactions. These are interactions between those who are affected by the authority exercised in the legislature, in the executive, and in the judiciary. And the last one I refer to is cross-government interactions. So think, if you will, you can have interactions between 1, 2, and 3, and 4, or you could have interactions between 2, 3, and 4, or interactions between 3 and 4, and so on. And I refer to these as cross-governance interactions. All right, so we're getting down to some serious business now. And I want to spend some time dealing with the type of governance arrangements that we have now compared to what we are aspiring to. All right. So what we have now is a single center authority government. So we have the Tobago House of Assembly, and the THA makes Tobago specific laws and Tobago specific policies. What we aspire to is a governance arrangement with two centers of authority. So we'll have the Tobago House of Assembly on one level, all right? And then we are aspiring to a government for the city of Scarborough and what I call the Greater Scarborough region. Now, Scarborough is a small city. The data I have seen suggests that there are about just over 1,000 people living in Scarborough, and you can't form a city with 1,000 people. You have to include a bigger region. So I am defining Scarborough this evening as Scarborough and the Greater Scarborough region. All right. So now we have a Tobago House of Assembly that makes Tobago-specific laws and Tobago-specific policies. We are trying to build out now a new government arrangement where the Scarborough and the Greater Scarborough region will pass bylaws and policies for an area that we would define as the city of Scarborough and the Greater Scarborough region. So, for the rest of my presentation, I have one burden. I've here advanced 6 key questions that I would systematically present until I get to the end of my presentation. The first question is, what should be the jurisdictional limits or the geographical extent of the city of Scarborough and the Greater Scarborough area or Greater Scarborough region? What would be the sub-areas within the jurisdictional limits of the city of Scarborough and the GSR? What would be the structure of government for the city of Scarborough and the GSR? How would the sub-areas shape governance interactions within the government of the city of Scarborough and the GSR? What would be the governance interactions between the regional council of a new city of Scarborough and a Greater Scarborough area and the executive council of the THA in a dual-centric governance model? And finally, and I'm not going to answer this question, this is for the panel, for the audience, what, if any, are the legislative limits of the THA in establishing the city of Scarborough and the Greater Scarborough area? So it has been very difficult for me to find a decent map of Scarborough online and data that seem to make sense about the size of Scarborough. Sometime this evening, I was able to wrestle up this would make sense to me. That Scarborough has about 1,167 people, and this is from the 2011 census by CSO. And the area of Scarborough is about 1.134 square kilometers. This is the best information I could have found. So if I am wrong, don't persecute me. So for the first 2 questions I posed earlier, all right, what should be the jurisdictional limits and the sub-areas? The map I'm showing you here is a map I got from the 2012 election. So the EDC usually produces these maps. It has not yet produced a map for the 15 seats or the 15 electoral districts. So when I say the Greater Scarborough region, this red circle you're seeing here is the area I'm talking about. All right, so currently, this area is, I think, is about 5 electoral districts. Bagatelle Bacolet, Dallas Spring Wim, Lambo Lowlands, Scarborough Mount Grace, Signal Hill, Patience Hill. Right, and within this, of course, there are several villages. So I am suggesting that we define what I call the Greater Scarborough region based on these 5 electoral districts. All right. So my third question is, what would be the structure of government for the city of Scarborough and the GSR? So this is a simple model. There are no processes in this model. It just lays out a basic structure for what a new government might look like. So in the green box, I have a regional council, which is constituted by a mayor and councillors, all right? And you would have overseeing the Greater Scarborough region and the city of Scarborough, oversight committees. So these oversight committees will have responsibility for things like audits, and these are not cast in stone or bylaws for civic appointments, for finances and grants. And just under that oversight committee, you will have some standing committees. You would have an executive committee. All right. You also have an economic development committee, safety and security committee, city infrastructure, environmental protection, and so on. And you could build these out into several committees. And a touch under the standing committees, you would have an advisory committee. All right. Later on in my presentation, I would demonstrate how these different committees would function in a new Scarborough government. All right. So the next question is, how would the sub-area shape governance interactions with the government of the city of Scarborough and the GSR? So read this schematic from the bottom up. So in my new model, the one I'm suggesting, village councils and what I call electoral district councils will play a key role in a city government and in the government for the greater Scarborough region. All right. So if we start from the bottom up, all right, village council would collaborate with villagers to identify, select, and prioritize projects and programs. And the village council would then make recommendations based on priority projects to what I call electoral district councils. Now, electoral district councils would be constituted by members of the village council. All right. In the model I am proposing, you would have to elect village council members. So now we have an arrangement where the people who attend village council meetings would, by show of hands, perhaps elect a president, a secretary, treasurer, and so on. And what I'm proposing here is that you would elect village council executives based on a system of ranked balloting. And for those who may be new to ranked balloting simply means that if there are, say, 5 people up for the position of president, each person that votes in that election would have 5 votes. So you can vote for each of those 5 people. You would rank them. So your number 1 vote would be for John, number 2 for Tom, number 3 for Harry, and so on until you vote for the 5 people. Okay? So the electoral district councils would now coordinate the recommendations of projects and programs that were prioritized by the village councils. All right, so at the bottom level, you have village councils that would be selected by rank balloting. All right, the village council members, those from the executive, would go on to form what I call electoral district councils. All right, so these would be selected from the executive of the village council. All right, the other layer of government you will have is the layer for the city of Scarborough and for the greater Scarborough area. Now the regional councils would select from among the electoral district councils and from NGOs to serve on standing committees and advisory committees. That's the schematic I showed you earlier, with advisory committees at the bottom and standing committees. Okay. So the regional council would make selections from the electoral district councils to sit on advisory committees and standing committees. I'll give you a real example. I now sit on the advisory committee for the environment in the London City Council, where I live now. All right. So when these positions became available, the City Council put out an ad online on their website and said they are looking for people to serve on these committees. I applied, I was interviewed, and I was co-opted into the committee. Now, these advisory committees have real teeth. Right? So every Thursday, I would go to City Hall and I would sit with my colleagues and we would deliberate on serious policy matters. And we would make recommendations, and those recommendations would find their way up to the standing committees and eventually up to council. All right, so this is the kind of role I see for the electoral district council members serving on advisory council. And indeed, other members of the public can serve on advisory councils. And to the very top, all right, what we'll have, because we are not only looking for a governance, a model for Scarborough, but for a greater Scarborough region, you would have what I call a regional council, all right? And the members of the regional council would form committees, and these are the oversight committees, executive committees, standing committees, and so on. So now, how would the regional councils interact with the Tobago House of Assembly? All right. So I already indicated that regional councils would select members from the electoral districts and from NGOs to serve on standing and advisory committees. All right. Regional councils would also collaborate with city residents, with business owners, and representatives from electoral district councils within those advisory committees I also indicated earlier. All right. Now the key here is what is the capacity of this new city to raise revenue? So at the very top, if the city, especially in the initial stages, if the city cannot raise the kind of revenues, because you have to run a city, all right, and you need revenue. If the city cannot raise revenue, what you would have happening is the THA would have to give to the city a subvention to do the things that the city will have responsibility for. Things like parking, perhaps, and garbage collection. All right. But on the side, I said that this will not be required if the city and the GSR raises and retains some of its own revenue. So, given the scale of this project, sometime in the future, the city of Scarborough will be able to raise significant revenue. And those revenues, perhaps part of that can remain with the city to run its own affairs, and some can be deposited perhaps into a municipal fund. Okay, so that's the thinking here. And finally, this is merely a composite of how this entire thing would work. So in this model, you have a significant involvement by village councils and by electoral district councils, all right? And members from each of these councils can be co-opted to serve on advisory committees or these standing committees, all right? So if you read my schematic from the bottom up, you see how building out Scarborough into the greater Scarborough area, all right, you will be able to engage persons in village councils, perhaps in Darrell Spring, in Bacalet, all right, as part of the process of decision making for this area, this new area that I'm referring to as the city of Scarborough and the greater Scarborough region. So the last question, I am not answering this question. I'm just putting this question out there for members of the public to perhaps ponder on and maybe ask questions on as we go forward. So what, if any, are the legislative limits of the THA in establishing the city of Scarborough and the GSR? Now, my understanding is that at some point in time in this process, the secretary, and I hope I'm not putting him on the spot here, would take to the House, all right, a bill to debate to establish this new configuration, that is to say, the city of Scarborough and the GSR, all right? So we have to start thinking about what are the limits of the Tobago House of Assembly in passing a law to establish this new area called the city of Scarborough and the greater Scarborough region. And there ended my presentation. Thank you for your patience.
We've come to the point where we hear from you, the members of the public. Here are the ground rules. Each person on the Zoom will be allowed to ask one question in the first instance. You raise your virtual hand and the director will attend to you. Questions may also be posed to the panel via the message box. For those viewing on Facebook and YouTube, you can post your questions there. Our team is there with you. If you wish to call directly, and we hope you do, the number is 73-WORKS or 739-6957. Powered in part by B-Mobile, life is on. Let's go. It's open forum time. And on Zoom, I have two persons. I have Mr. Sean Powder. I don't know if you're still there and want to ask your question, But Mr. Powder, I'll take you now. Mr. Powder?
Yes, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay, my apologies. Yeah, first of all, I want to thank all the presenters and thank the THA for providing us with this opportunity. I guess my fundamental question is, we're talking about developing and urbanizing Scarborough, and you only urbanize anywhere and decide land use if you've got an overall economic plan for the island. What is the economic plan for Tobago that justifies the urbanization of Scarborough?
I think Mr. James will take your question, Mr. Powder.
Mr. Powder, as I said in my note, I think you are right on spot. The THA has to work out the answer to the question, this deadly serious question you're asking, and let the people of Tobago know how we're going to build an economy that can carry a city like Scarborough is intended to be. As far as I know, that work is going on and isn't yet finished, so we really do not have any serious answer to the question you're posing, but it is the correct question to pose.
What's the name?
Thank you for your response, but I guess I've become a little bit concerned only because historically, whether in Tobago and Trinidad, we have a history of building buildings or doing projects. And I would hate for Scarborough to be the idea of having Scarborough as another project without having the economic analysis done first. Because maybe it may turn out that Scarborough is not the appropriate place to do urbanization.
Exactly.
But we've already decided it is before we've done the analysis.
Mr. Powder, we thank you for your contribution, and I know that your questions will form a part of what we consider when we develop or redevelop the Scarborough City Center. So we do thank you. We have a caller online, Mr. Joefield. Are you with us? Good evening.
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yes, Mr. Joefield, you can go ahead. Welcome.
Right. I'm a prison supervisor for the Tobago prison at present. I've been listening to the contribution and I've heard nothing about the prison and what plans are there for it within the scheme of this urban development. Could I get some sort of feedback about how do we intend to go forward as it relates to the prison?
Mr. Joefield, we thank you for your question. Mr. Joefield is asking a question of the prisons. He said he hasn't heard anything in the plans that we've presented today about the prisons building and how that will work in the new Scarborough. So he's asking a question about the prison. Will any of the panelists take that question?
Well, at this stage, we are still developing the master plan for Scarborough. So the prison will also be considered and be implemented in our final designs for Scarborough.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
In the final analysis, after the prison might not be in Scarborough, although it would be considered, it may not be in Scarborough.
I don't know why they're not hearing me. Sophie.
They have land in the place.
We thank you, Mr. Joefield, for your questions, and we do thank our contributors for their response. And as the plan is developed, we'll get more answers to the questions. At this point, we're just doing, most of the brainstorming, gathering the information, understanding what you want to see in a new developed Scarborough. I will take Mr. TEMA Director. Are you with us, Mr. Stewart? Mr. Stewart, I see your mic unmuted, but I'm not hearing you as yet. Are you with us?
Yes, I am here. Let me just say a very good evening to all on the panel. A very distinguished list of persons, expertise, well received this evening. I have a few concerns, and coming out of a meeting with the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction only yesterday, and a couple of your colleagues were part of that very, very important meeting that spoke to the issues of a resilient city and the introduction of a scorecard. In those discussions yesterday, it was very pertinent for me to make an injection pointing out the vision of the Tobago House of Assembly as it relates to this very ambitious project of which I'm very, very proud of. So the question is, one is that it is my wish that the resilient city concept will be brought into the planning phases of this very important project. Smart cities is where the world is today in terms of making Scarborough a smart city, and therefore I also want to see that the infrastructure to support what you're doing. And when I speak about infrastructure, I'm speaking about the ICT infrastructure support whatever we are doing to make it a smart city and also a resilient city. I was very pleased to hear the project coordinator from Salisha Duke and also Nader present at that meeting, which was very well received. There are some questions that I hope that the panel will be able to address, and it speaks to physical infrastructure of existing troubling institutions that are currently housed in Scarborough. And I speak sincerely to that of the prison, which is one which I believe by now in concept, we should know where it should be based on the age of this argument going forward. The police station, the fire station. These are issues that need to be addressed in the planning concept as early as possible. The gentleman that went before me did speak about the economic benefits and what is the economic plan towards it. And I am eagerly wrapping my mind around it, because Scarborough in its physical state, and you did speak about the issue that it was very difficult to generate or to develop a new city without having the geographic space and also the numbers. So those are my questions and those are my comments. I will listen for the response. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. I'm looking at the panel to see if they have any contributions or if they will just absorb your questions and resolve the answers, because we have to understand that we haven't come to the table with answers. We've come to the table to hear your contributions, to hear your questions, and so that they can go back at the drawing board with your questions and find the answers. So I'm not sure any of the panelists want to take that, those two questions Mr. Stewart had, or if we'll deliberate on them and come back at the next consultation with an answer. It seems like we will deliberate a little more, Mr. Stewart, and we'll definitely be in communication. I will take Ms. Miriam Moe.
I would like to commend the panel and the division for this noble, long-needed development of Scarborough. I listened to all the presentation. They were right up to where we, the people of Tobago, have been wanting for years, especially the presenter, the last presenter, when he spoke about those six approach that he has. which will involve the people and the village and the council and going all the way up to the THA. This is something that I think a member of your panel, Dr. James, that he had for years was envisioning not only for Scarborough but for Tobago. What I would like though, since we're dealing only with Scarborough, I would like to, I did not hear anything mentioned about, I know there's a lot of time that you will be developing and planning and coming back to the people and so on, but I would like to interject right here that I'm told that there are 30-something acres of land bordering the Fort King George and Bacolette. And I would like to hear something about that at some point to see how that whole area could be incorporated in your plan, because remember, Fort King George is a tourist destination and also a place for the Tobagonians that we love to go to. So I'm sure that you have that in your plan. I just want to make it known that we are looking at that area for development. So thank you, and you are on a good trajectory, and may God continue to bless Tobago and the current Tobago House of Assembly as they develop these plans. Thank you.
Ms. Moore, we thank you for your contribution. We now take a question from our Facebook feed. Please explain how you determined that a roundabout would be the preferred form of intersection, and how will pedestrians from the new residential development safely and effectively cross the highway?
Yeah, so there will be a skywalk between the new housing development crossing the highway, so pedestrians can safely traverse from the housing development all the way down to the port area. And with further studies of the traffic flow in Tobago, we will finalize this most suitable option for that junction, whether it's a roundabout or traffic lights.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. We have a few questions about containerized shipments, so I'll merge all your questions about that into one right now. Is there any room for containerized shipping, and will there be storage containers or storage for the containers? Sorry. So is there consideration in the plans for containerized shipping, and is there consideration for storage of containers in the plan?
Yes, there is a container esplanade to be housed near the existing terminal, which is part of the new development for the port area. So that was considered in our design, and moving forward, obviously, with additional studies and research, the plan will be modified based on the information received from our research.
Great. Before I head back to Zoom, let me ask a few more of these questions. Were any other alternative master plans considered? And what will be done, if anything, about the dilapidated state-owned school in Shore Park?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Were any other master plans considered when coming up with the concept for the revitalized Scarborough? And is anything being done about the dilapidated state-owned school in Shore Park?
Okay, so this concept was developed based on the vision of the current administration. They also considered previous master plans for Scarborough, which was implemented in our proposal. And also, yes, we have plans for the coast alongside Scarborough Sec to rebuild the seawall there and to improve the infrastructure behind Scarborough Sec.
May I indicate That there have not been an exact statement from the Executive Council on Scarborough Sec as yet. They may have been thinking about it, but they have not given us any input with respect to that. So we wait and see what the new administration has in plan.
Madam Chair, can I come back in for 1 minute on the
Sure, you can,
containerized shipping?
Mr. James.
I want to alert the people of Tobago that once you begin to talk about containerized shipping in Scarborough, you are also primarily walking into the trap relating to imports. Tobago lives on imports, and it has no capacity to export as far as I am aware. If we're going to be building greater capacity to import, we had better be thoughtful about where we are going to find the foreign exchange from as Tobagonians, as a Tobago economy, where we're going to, what part of our economy will generate the foreign exchange we would need to finance imports. That's a huge question that this project is raising for the people of Tobago.
Thank you, panelists. We'll go right back to Zoom, and I'm taking Mr. Richard J. Richard J., are you with us? Good afternoon.
Yes, hello? Hello?
Yes, we're hearing
Hello,
you.
are you hearing me?
Yes, we
All
are.
right, good afternoon, yeah. I came in late because of, I guess, the Atlantic and Eastern time. I got a bit mixed up. But I want to thank the panelists for a well-thought-out redevelopment plan for Scarborough. My area of expertise is actually in finance and dealing with revenue bonds and construction of projects for public-private arrangements. Now, the first, I think, Dr. James, this is more or less because I came in late. I know the architect was talking about the convention center and the Esplanade and stuff like that. But specifically with regards to raising revenue, because they're going to look at, specifically, there might be a need for FDI, foreign direct investment. And in terms of that, you have to look at the actual payback. How are you going to pay for these projects, but it is done over a phased period? One of the questions I'm asking is, I know they talked about the housing development, and I was wondering if the planners had put in place a concept, since there's a greater Scarborough region which goes all the way down to Mount, I believe, Lowlands and Lambo, that if you incorporate like maybe high rises, or if, because Tobago space is finite, and I think there can be a lot of FDI coming in terms of real estate investment. They do it in Dubai, for example, and even if you look right now at, I think, the redevelopment of San Fernando, they are building a port, and they also have high rises. So I don't know if any one of the panelists, the architect, could kind of expand on that a bit, because I wasn't sure, like with the housing development, how much actually, in terms of residents, I know Scarborough has about 1,000 residents right now. So I'm trying to figure out if that concept of possibly putting in high rises or something like that, and I think there would be a sufficient attraction to people from the diaspora to come in and invest in Scarborough, and at the same time, you would get that, what Dr. Thomas was talking about in terms of the greater Scarborough region, you would have at least money coming in from the Burgesses to pay for the things that over time. So I don't know if anybody would like to kind of expand on that, or the architect, the planner, Mr. I think it's Joseph was talking about that. I don't know if someone could at least expand on that a bit for me, please.
Thank you for your question. Currently, the proposal for the housing development
Yes,
is
sir.
290 housing units,
Okay.
which also includes hotels and commercial space. At this stage, we are at just the conceptual stage at the moment. In-depth market research will be done.
Okay.
As to how feasible our proposal is, and then we will develop and finalize the conceptual design.
Okay.
Nadia, if I may just jump in. I spoke this evening about the Greater Scarborough region, but I have, and I hope the Secretary James would allow me to make this statement. But I have spoken to Secretary James and for the team at director also about a smart green city concept that extends all the way from Scarborough down to Canaan and the development of the entire, what I call the entire Southwest Peninsula. So what Richard is alluding to has to, and I believe has to be part of a bigger plan. All right, I spoke deliberately about a Greater Scarborough region. All right, but I feel that if we are to really do the scale of development that Richard is talking about, we have to see the entire Southwest area as one big development area with a city in Scarborough, a city in Canaan, and we develop all the way from Bacalet back down to Plymouth, right back into Canaan. You would then have the catchment population, all right, to make these kinds of investments. And if I could speak just lastly to Alan's point, Alan, I think what we have to do not only is to develop a resilient city, but we must develop an entire green belt concept, all right, throughout the Southwest area.
Thank you for your contributions. I'll go back at this point to some of the questions that are coming in via Facebook and WhatsApp. Has it been considered to move out all the cargo from Scarborough to the Study Park area to free up space and traffic, but also to create more opportunities for further development in the east of the island?
Well, I think there was a proposal to make Cove the cargo hub of Tobago. So I think that idea will be considered as well, moving forward in our overall development of Tobago.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. As I move back to Zoom, I want to remind our viewers that when you're asking a question, to try to be brief. We're running a bit short on time now and we want to get everyone in. So when you come in, ask a question and we try to respond to you as best as possible. So we'd move swiftly along to Mr. Ricardo Alfred. Mr. Alfred, welcome. We're not hearing you, Mr. Alfred.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you a bit now. If you could speak a little louder, that will help.
Okay, brilliant. I just want to say that the concept is a good concept. However, I do have some serious concerns. That they have the issue of the port development, right? So they're speaking about the shipping and something about containers, right? It is if the study was regarding the different tides, the currents, and a port of Scarborough, what consideration happens there, because the port have some serious challenges, right? To put up the idea of putting a container terminal there, I don't think it being feasible, because you have to attract the different container lines. Trinidad and Tobago has a very low connectivity index in terms of shipping. So I'm not sure exactly what they use as a measuring stick, to have that kind of so that was the really.
Well, at this point, we also have Smith Warner, who is responsible for the coastal studies of the area, and they will give us all the information required to further develop our master plan. He also asked
thank you, Mr. Stewart. I am thinking that I've heard you wrapped up that comment. Thank you, Mr. Ricardo, for your contribution. I'm going to take another question. Mr. Anselm Richards. Mr. Anselm Richards would like to know whether the legislative authority and City of Scarborough will have revenue capacity to carry the proposed government arrangement. Mr. James, I don't know if you can contribute any to that question.
Well, it's a fine question. And it illustrates the importance of answering the question, what kind of economy we're going to be building in order to be able to afford this city. Economists, Anselm is an economist, and economists are accustomed to thinking in terms of something we call effective demand. You may want a city, but the question is, are you going to be able to pay for it? Or are you going to send to Trinidad for the money to pay for it? We have to, fundamental to this question of building a city in Scarborough, of any kind, in whatever area, greater or small, is the question of what kind of economy we in Tobago are going to be able to build to allow the city to function either as a self-contained, self-governing unit or to be subsidized by the THA. We do not know the answer to that question, and we don't know the answer to Anselm's question because we're not finished working it out. And may I say, we also do not know how important a priority should be assigned to what level of priority should be assigned to a city in the context of whatever other infrastructure needs we have to build out the kind of economy that will allow us to afford the city.
Thank you, Dr. James. Professor Herbert Suku would like to know, given the abundance of the naturally occurring industrial rocks as input into infrastructural development, what plans are there to ensure its sustainable development? Dr. Boris, would you be able to give any input into?
Well, at least at the quarry of which Dr. Suku is very much aware, because he has been part of the operation, or thinking about the operation, he has been part of training persons to be part of the quarry operation at one time. So at least what the Secretary has indicated is that he wants to magnify the operation at Study Park Quarry to ensure that it can able to help to boost the economy in a way with the downstream products that will be coming out of it. Maybe we will have like pre-stressed concrete and things like that, or the downstream operation from the quarry itself, plus the aggregates to be exported and boulders that would be produced can also be sold. So it's a process, is a planning process, and we hope that at least it will help to augment the economy in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Dr. Boris. As we move the open forum back to Zoom, I'd like to remind participants to be brief and ask your questions very succinctly. Dr. Sean Ned, are you with us? Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to first say thank you to the panelists for a great presentation. I have a base query around the lines of holistic view of the development of Tobago as well as trade. My concern is, how does this jigsaw puzzle part of Tobago fit in with the rest of Tobago? So that would be a question along the lines of the economic plans. So you would have had CEDP 1, CEDP 2, as well as even Dr. James's Tobago Development Plan back in 1998. And if it is that there is a larger plan that we should look at when we think of all of the different parts as we're describing Scarborough and the Greater Scarborough? And then along with that, what exactly are we doing to gain trade for Tobago? So if it is that the Act 40 of 1996 speaks to that Tobago only controls the infrastructure for the ports, then how are we going to navigate that if we have to make money from trade in and out, import-export options? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Panel, any takers?
We'll absorb the question and deal with it as been asked.
We're moving on to Mr. Arthur Potts. Mr. Arthur Potts, good night.
Evening, everybody. I am Arthur Potts from DIQUD originally, and still from DIQUD. I just have a simple concern, because my initial concern was the economics and how we'd be able to fund and manage a 1,000 resident city and so on, and a lot of persons have spoken about it, which makes me realize that Tobago has about 60,000 people on 116 square miles. We need to be seeing Tobago as the island, with Scarborough as the city center. And maybe Tobago, the way you see Bahamas, and if you talk about Nassau, people think Nassau is just one little city, but it's literally a whole island. And maybe we have to start thinking in terms of what a lot of persons have been raising tonight, expanding from just that city circle that you showed with the red line. That is not just what it is. We have to get down to include all the way to Crown Point, all the way back, because nowhere in Tobago is literally far. You drive for a little distance and you'll get somewhere in no time at all, about 7 miles wide. And so therefore, we really have to start thinking Tobago as the island. The island is what we want to develop. Secretary James's concept of really taking charge of Scarborough and making it into someplace important, absolutely important, very good concept. I like the design that you all showed tonight. The master plan is nice, but I think we have to start thinking, how do we include all of Tobago as we do this? And 60,000 people are not thinking 1,000, because that is, and the other question that James was trying to deal with just now, how do we fund this? Do we go to Trinidad central government for annual subvention to be able to run Tobago the same way? Or are we going to find ways to make money? Quarry is just a little change here, another little tourism change here, but the conversation needs to continue in a really in-depth way to deal with the funding and to deal with inclusion of more of Tobago. And then my other last thing, a lot of conversation talk about expanding the Scarborough into the sea. Some 53 acres or something, I heard, that's what it was. Correct when I heard that up front. You're going into the sea. There's where my expertise lies. I am a marine scientist person. I'm concerned about the coastal erosion issues, about the fishes and everything else. And I'm starting to wonder. When I was a little bit at Bishop's High School, I used to play on the sand. When I come down to the ground to get a taxi to go to Panacot to go home. Now there's no such thing, because we put the port in the sea, where the sea is in the back when I stand up in front of the cinema. So therefore, if we go further for another 53 acres inside the sea, it's not just Lambeau and West Scarborough seconds to be, it's all the way down. So are we taking some of those things into consideration? Who was involved in your think tank to advise on matters related to coastal and coastal erosion? Dr. Burris is an expert in that. He alone can handle that. And I'm going to say that up front. These are serious matters. And therefore, more conversation needs to take place. I know you're in the early stages. I really admire the job of Mr. James, the secretary, and his concern about this. And I really admire the job of all the Tobagonians that you have there. I'm really happy. Everybody this evening was a Tobagonian or some kind of Tobagonian that really spoke. And I really enjoy seeing that. And I look forward to what this thing is going to become. Thank you very much.
Mr. Potts, we thank you for your question. I'm going to invite our secretary, Mr. Trevor James, to cover the first part of your question that kind of stemmed around where we're getting the money from. And after that, I'll ask the our technical advisor to the division, Dr. Boris, to answer the coastal-related questions. She had concerns about the reclamation of land and the coastal work and what we're doing there. So I'll have Dr. Boris answer that after Secretary James addresses your concerns about finding funding. Secretary James, good night and welcome. Secretary James.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I just wanted to respond to a couple questions and concerns that was raised. But first, let me thank the panel and thank the organizers for a wonderful organized consultation. I know that we started late, and there are challenges with the technology and all that, and I'm sure we will do better next week. The idea of first underpinning the development of the city by some economic study or any development that is, of underpinning it first by some economic study and determining what the payback model is and how we're going to pay for this, where we're going to find the money, seems to be a big concern for a lot of people and even some of the presenters. And I want to say that over the years, we've lived in a Tobago that has been budgeted for as a percentage, a per capita percentage of the Trinidad and Tobago budget. And for some reason, we are locked into that, and we still hear conversations about going to Trinidad to get money, to do what we want in Tobago. The reality, however, is that we contribute significantly to what is Trinidad and Tobago, and we have been doing so for years. And the model of per capita budgeting is something to be thrown out into the waste paper basket if we in Tobago are going to benefit at all from the significant resources that rightfully belong to Tobago. And we have to begin as Tobagonians to think of ourselves as being equal and being major contributors, and our population that has remained stagnant over the last 40 years is as a consequence of economic, willful, infrastructural decisions taken in Port of Spain that has impacted our population over the years and prevented the growth in our economies and our effective demand and so on. And we have an opportunity now to begin the conversation as to how we change the budgeting structure that is Trinidad and Tobago. I just want to give a couple of examples. In the last 6, 7, 8 years, the government of Trinidad and Tobago took a decision to build a highway from San Fernando to Point Forte, that up to date is costing close to $5 billion. The idea was to connect 25 to 30,000 people in Point Forte to San Fernando. And they thought that fit to spend that money. Over the last 20 years, the PSIP in Trinidad is in excess of $70 billion. And we in Tobago, some of us still continue to talk about per capita budgeting. We have to begin to see ourselves as an equal partner in the relationship. Otherwise, we come to the place where we have to accept that the relationship is not making sense, has not made sense, and is not making sense. In any event, the gentleman who spoke, Richard J., there are significant finances available for PPP arrangements, and we must understand and not limit our thinking to this idea that someone in Port of Spain is going to help us or will help us or plan to help us in this whole process. We in Tobago have to accept that the responsibility of building whatever we want, even if the consultations bring out a reality that the port is unnecessary, bring out a reality that we must move the city to Palatuvere, that we should put a container port in Cove, or we should put a cruise ship complex in Plymouth. That's what the consultations do. And we have presented a starting point for the consultations. Nothing is built in stone, and we will determine, and together with those who are doing the economic appraisal for Tobago and the economic planning for Tobago, together we will do all of these things together. We cannot waste another month trying to do things in series. It's just not in our best interest. I just wanted to say that and thank everybody for participating. We will get it better next time, and let me apologize on behalf of the team at the division for the late start, for the technical issues that we have had, and we will do better next time. Much thanks.
Thank you, Secretary James. Dr.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
The issue pertaining to erosion and coastal assessment, which Dr. Potts has raised, is in reality a good point that he has raised, and that Ellis Boris alone cannot do all the work, and I agree with that. But if he had been here a little earlier when the lead architect presented, lead architect spoke about the supporting engineers that he has, the port engineers. So I will only oversight what they're doing to ensure that the state or Tobago gets what is required and that is right for the operation. Because when you're going to do a port, you're not just going to just go put down exactly what is on the drawing here. It has to be modeled, and you have to put in breakwaters, and you have to shift the berthing arrangement to ensure that the ships can be able to move off the berths with care and things like that. So we have to ensure that what is done is technically correct. You may have something that looks beautiful, but engineering-wise, it may need adjustment. So it's against the modelings that will take place that will give the final analysis of the layout of the port. All right, so that is in process with the lead architect. Once ever that is done and I oversight it and ensure that is correct, then the port will be arranged according to the final analysis from the modeling.
Thank you, Dr. Boris, for your contribution. We continue with our viewers via Zoom. David Elder, good evening.
To everyone, thank you very much. To the host.
Yes, Mr. Elder, we're hearing you. You can go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much to everyone, to Mr. James, to the Chief Secretary, and Dr. James, Dr. Thompson, Mr. Stewart, and everyone who has contributed this evening. It has been very exciting and interesting. Bear with me, there is one little input I'd like to make, in fact two. And first, as a man of the cloth, I want to urge us as we go forward with these exciting ideas for Tobago's development. I'm all with it. This is a wonderful plan that we remember. The scripture says, except the Lord builds the house, we labor in vain. So I trust that we and all Tobago are going to really pray and see God's guidance and God's blessings in what we do going forward. We'll be praying for the Chief Secretary and the entire team for success. Now, I would like to make a slight input on the proposed development for Scarborough, the city and the port area. More than 15 years ago, I shared with the THA, Secretary Negus and others, people, a suggestion for the expansion of the port of Scarborough and the city of Scarborough, the town of Scarborough, by reclamation. And what I put in a very simple note, not being an engineer and not being versed in any of those sciences, is that subject to all the engineering studies, the coastal studies and all of that, if reclamation were possible, I saw that the reclamation could extend way down to Lambo, which will provide additional space. That's the entrance to Lambo just past, I think that's the Thompson River, past the abattoir, past Old Licensing Office. And then we have a problem area there in Shore Park towards Scarborough. Like everybody knows that problem. I'm wondering if a successful reclamation program that spans Rocky Bay and goes into Lambo can, with engineering that is done, serve to solve the problems we have been having in the land slippage in that whole region from Shore Park going down to the abattoir. I want to keep it short. That's my essential idea. Thought this is a wonderful plan. I'm wondering if it can be extended. I'm wondering right now whether this is a 5-year plan or whether this is going to be 15 years down the road. I don't have any idea. No time suggestion was given. I'm not sure if there's a time frame that Mr. James and his team has worked out so that while he's in office for his first term, we may be able to see something started towards this development. But it's a wonderful idea. And then several people have shared that there are so many related facts that have to be considered. They are all excellent. And I think of simple things like Tobago has a serious problem with water and wastewater, where that comes in. Tobago has serious problems with productivity. Tobago has a serious need for serious food production. And there are many other thoughts I have, but an excellent program. And I'm hoping to see in my lifetime to see something like this develop for the progress of the people of Tobago, even though at the moment I'm speaking from outside Tobago, like Dr. Thompson, I'm in Tobago in my mind and my heart, and Mr. Dr. Potts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pastor Elder. We have a few persons waiting still to ask their questions on the Zoom questions, so we continue to ask you to be quick, ask your questions once you're on. Good evening, Colonel Job.
Yes, good evening to the panelists, to the hosts, and to everyone here. I believe the plans are excellent plans. I just want to say that project goals should be smart. They should be specific, they should be measurable, they should be attainable, they should be realistic, and they should be time bound. I believe the goals of this development should focus on generating the greatest returns in the shortest possible time. I just want to say two other things. According to the Standing Finance Committee 2020, Tobago generates most of its finances from tourism, transportation, food production, fisheries, and cultural arts. I think the project should concentrate on these areas. And finally, according to the review of Trinidad and Tobago Economy 2020, the last time Trinidad and Tobago recorded a physical surplus was in 2008. Since then, Trinidad and Tobago has been involved in debt financing. So I believe financing of the project would be a big issue to come. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you very much.
Mr. Job, we do thank you for your contribution, and we will consider when developing the plans. Thank you very much. Bernard Henry, good evening. Mr. Bernard Henry, are you with us? Good evening.
I'm with you. Thanks for having me. Consistent with any physical development, crime follows. Are there any proposals for one, having the police be involved in this process to curb crimes? Are there any proposals for having throughout the length and breadth of wherever the development takes place to have cameras that are operational and functional and working so that the incidents of crime persons can be detected? That's one. In Tobago, and then with this development, for me there'll be more traffic. There is absolutely no regard, no respect for pedestrians and cyclists. I've heard about the development of a housing and for overpass. Won't it be prudent for sidewalks to be constructed as well, and for there be legislation to ensure that pedestrian and cyclist rights be respected? My final concern has to do with the Scarborough Greater Region. Within Tobago, there has been a total, okay, we do not know what is Scarborough right now. I mean, I don't know. So if we are going to define a Greater Scarborough region, to me, it is imperative that we know precisely what are the correct names for those areas that would be involved in the Greater Scarborough region. Whether it's a Greater Scarborough region or just Scarborough, it is important that the historic names of these areas be retained. And clearly, most importantly, there are some people, lots of us, who love the green. So despite concrete and roads, it is important, it is imperative, it is necessary that we maintain the greens, that we create spaces and areas for recreation, where people can go and relax on a Sunday evening with their families. I have an idea which I can bring to the table at some appointed time. Adios.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. We're always open to your contributions, and we will take your questions and concerns and your entire contribution into consideration. I want to remind our audience that the plans presented tonight are not set in stone. It's not that the division is going to go into Scarborough and start doing exactly what you've seen presented tonight. And that's the reason for the consultations. It is because there is a need to talk, a need to understand what the people of Tobago will like to see, what is necessary and what is possible given our current economic status and where we plan to go as an island. So with those things in mind and the time on our hand and the number of persons we have still with questions and comments, we encourage you again to keep your questions short and to the point, noting that we are listening and we are noting your concerns. Ashford Cleghorn, good evening.
Afternoon, good afternoon. I will keep it real brief. I really have a 4-tier plan for Scarborough, alternative plan. However, I will just touch on tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 being the port. I am questioning, does it really make economic sense to build a big port in that we produce that amount of goods, right? As a cargo person, what would entice me to want to stop in Tobago, right? It got to make economic sense for me as a cargo or marine guy, shipping company, and it must make sense for Tobago. When these ships stop in Tobago, is this port going to be a sort of hub? Are we going to make it hub that anything come through the Panama Canal, going to stop in Tobago, and from there we ship to other areas in the Caribbean? Or are we going to be suddenly producing so much that it makes sense for a ship to want to stop in Tobago? And as you guys, and as we build for tier 2, I want them to consider making in front of the port area, and this could be done as soon as possible, a non-vehicular zone in that we're going to encourage walking. You'll have your little coffee shops and whatever in that area. So you're going to be, that whole area is non-vehicular traffic, just foot traffic. So I would leave it there for now, right? As far as it making economic sense to, to actually build a bigger port, given what we are producing now, and do we intend to produce so much that it makes sense for a cargo ship want to stop in Tobago?
Thank you, Mr. Cleghorn, for your contribution. We're moving on to Mr. George Leacock. Good evening, Mr. Leacock. Mr. Leacock, are you with us? Good evening.
Good evening. You hear me now?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay. As far as I'm aware, Scarborough is a very small port. It's protected by Red Rock and a reef by the name of Bulldog. Just a few years ago, a ship came into Scarborough, tried to turn, ended a few meters out of the channel. And Billy and Michael Baker and them had to go on board that ship and sing for the whole night to wait for tide to rise again for the ship to be able to go out. I'm trying to establish in the first instance, how did we decide that we are going to manage Scarborough's development from the point of view of port expansion to bring cruise ships? I've seen other people writing in the chat about being at the end of the cruise ship chain when people have already spent all their money on other islands. How did we establish as cruise ships? How are we going to get 3 cruise ships, 2 fast ferries, and maybe the cargo boat into the port and turn them around, bearing in mind that you have Bulldog and Red Rock? Somebody may say, well, block piece of Bulldog and block piece of Red Rock. That would make us the only country in the world that decides to damage a protective reef of a harbor in a time when we're dealing with rising tides and global warming, right? So that provides the first challenge. The second part of the challenge is that the Scarborough Harbor currently contains 18 or 19 wrecks that are subsea, that are of some kind of economic value as part of our historical archive. What are we going to do about that? Are we going to excavate them? Did we consider maybe not being so intrigued by having 3 or 4 boats in the harbor? Because with due respect to the architect, all I saw in terms of a study was that there were other harbors in the world that had 3 or 4 boats, so we could have 3 or 4 ships too, right? Additionally, right, when you get outside the fact of the limited size of the Scarborough Harbor, the fact that it will probably be a very bad idea to damage any of the natural protections that you have. We up almost to Mountain Georgia, then come in, because that's where the channel is, right? That allows you into the Scarborough Harbor, right? More than that, I worked at Shore Park for 9 years, and every kind of expert from every country around the world came to Shore Park and looked at that place that is collapsing in the back of Scarborough Secondary School. Nobody has presented a reasonable option for treating with what is clearly a sinkhole. A sinkhole, we know that because all the trees in it are standing straight up. If it was shearing off sideways, the trees would lean. It is falling straight down, right? So the notion that you're going to build a wall in front of it or something like that, right, and that is going to solve the problem, is a problem. If it was shearing off at an angle, you can cut in opposite the angle and maybe stop it from shearing off. So that, to me, outside of the economic issues, but making cruise ship-centered operation, and I'm not even going to talk about containerized cargo, because the Panmax now has increased and is 6,000 containers cargo ship will be carried in the future, right? And I don't know if it's going to come into Tobago and drop off 3 with fridges for people for Christmas, and then leave with half a load of something or other sort, right? So that there is a lot of fundamental work that should have been done before this. And more than that, while people are continually saying in this thing that nothing is cut in stone, there's a difficulty that people sometimes have when you put people to sit in a room and you present something that's already drawn up and it's nice, pretty pictures and that kind of thing, the impression that it sears onto your mind is that it is in fact already planned. We have heard about who are the consultants, who are the engineering, water engineer and all that kind of thing already on a team, right? And we have not yet set up a philosophical base for what we want to do. I also heard somebody say something that's extremely dangerous in the past, that Scarborough was always a dirty little place, and that is not so. There was a point in Scarborough's history where it accommodated a certain kind of cruise cargo, and you can go back, you can Google it, you can see the reports of the individuals of how beautiful the place was at that time, maintained in a particular fashion, and made it useful. Let me say one last thing. In the 1920s, when there was a commission of inquiry into the shipping out of Tobago, commission of inquiry was driven by Tobago's producers being upset that they did not have means to ship their stuff out, and the product was spoiling on the boat when it went on this wrongly island trip. And therefore, windjammers came from Grenada, and people who took the windjammers paid more, but they got the product to Port of Spain faster. All we are talking about, and I really need to compliment Dr. James on being so nice. All we are talking about, right, is putting ourselves in a position to consume and get more, as opposed to the production side that would start this. So my closing comment is, developing Scarborough probably does not start in the sea. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leacock, for your contribution. I will ask Mr. Stewart to give some comment on some of the things that you would have highlighted. And after Mr. Stewart comments on that, I'd ask Secretary James to also comment on what you've said, because you have indeed said a mouthful that deserves consideration.
So yes, thank you, Mr. Leacock, for your input. They are all very valid points. And at this stage of the presentation, it's just a reflection of the vision of the THA. Moving forward, all the consultants that we have on board will do a detailed study of the coastal area, the feasibility of the project, and the economic impact of our proposal before we finalize anything in terms of developing Scarborough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. Secretary James, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And thank you, Madam Moderator, for calling on me to respond. Access into the Port of Scarborough is an engineering challenge for which we will find an engineering solution. The port at Point 14, that is now controlled by the Atlantic LNG, has a severe challenge of silting up, and they had to build jetties that were a mile long. There are engineering challenges. Half of Port of Spain is built on reclaimed land, and they have to dredge that port systematically every 2-3 years. There are engineering challenges that present themselves not only in Scarborough, but around Tobago for any marine construction that we may consider. And we should not limit our thinking to believe because there's an engineering challenge that there is no solution. Two, a lot of people seem to think that you have to somehow have the level of production that's equal to your level of imports. So that if a ship lands at your door and it brings 25 containers, that you should have goods to fill 25 containers to make it feasible for some shipping company to decide to land at your door. I am not sure that is how it works. no one can tell me that Trinidad exports the same level of goods that comparable to what they import. Nor does Grenada, nor does Barbados, nor does Jamaica. That's not the reality. We have to conceptualize a vision for Tobago that allows for a productive increase that our people could now export. Currently, we have none. And if we do not consider and consult on how we can build something to give our people the opportunity, then we will never be able to export. And that is the reality with which we are faced. We have to find a way in this union that we have to equalize cost of production between Port of Spain and Scarborough so that we can compete. Currently, we can't compete in Trinidad, we can't compete in Barbados or St. Vincent or Grenada simply because we pay a premium for going through Port of Spain. And we have to rise to that place mentally where we think of ourselves as equal and we design something that benefits all of Tobago. The map on the screen just demonstrates that in the Caribbean, Tobago still remains the only island without an international port. Every island, as seen by that anchor, has an international port. Even the small ones, as since Eustatius and Bastia and Sabre, we have to know where we want to position ourselves and what opportunities we want to provide for our people, and to build economies that would allow for our diaspora to want to return and contribute. And the defeatist attitude that, we have a channel, we have Red Rock, we have limitations, we have no production, that's an old thinking that we have to rise above. Unfortunately, that's not the direction the new THA will go. We have to be futuristic, we have to be visionary, we have to want to position ourselves with the best opportunities to allow for economies to develop in Tobago. And the plan is not only about the port, but there are on-land plans that complement all of that. How do we bring people into the city so that businesses in the city can in fact thrive? How do we increase demand? How do we get more people in the private sector where there will probably be higher paying jobs to increase the effective demand that economists talk about? We can't do that if we leave the place as it is, unfortunately. And while one can accept that consultations will probably bring out that we must move container port here or tourism port there, the fact is that these are things that Tobago requires. And this process is about ensuring that we are finding the right, we're doing the right research and people are participating, and then final decisions could be made after the process is done. But I keep being disappointed by some things that I hear that sort of, suggest that this is an impossible thing and we should not do it because of all these challenges and these limitations. That kind of defeatist mentality is something we should rise out of. We've been at this game in this union for too long.
Thank you, Secretary James, for your contribution. We'll move on to Kwesi Batiste via Zoom. Mr. Batiste, are you with us? Good evening.
Hello, good afternoon. Good evening. Panel, good evening, fellow students. I just have a simple question that has been set in my mind. I know that with all the development, there comes along the regulation that governs the development. Will the proposed development for the city of Scarborough or any alternative development require a change in the current command conflict planning division regulation? If so, would that require some sort of parliamentary intervention? I'm not sure I'm asking. Or is it a simple adjustment in regulations that govern development?
Mr. Batiste, thank you for your question. Mr. Stewart or Dr. Boris, would any of you be able to contribute in the immediate instance to that question?
No, we will just absorb it because we have to probably do some investigation on things that we may need to do.
Thank you. Sean Potts, good evening. Mr. Potts doesn't seem to be with us anymore. Sean Roberts, good evening, welcome. Mr. Roberts, are you with us?
Okay. Good evening to the panel, all the TJ officials, and all the viewers from Tobago, Trinidad, and the rest of the world. I've listened to all the comments here, and I must say that we are stepping in a very innovative direction. And one of the questions we need to first ask ourselves is, how can we know if we don't try? And I could speak as an exporter of recyclable waste commodities. And I must say that we was able to export the first container load of recyclables out of Tobago, although it had to go through Trinidad, but we have started. However, I could give you all an example where when we used to co-processing for the spin with Swimcol, we had 2 40-foot containers to ship out of Point Lisas, and the ship line had refused to come to Point Lisas because it was only 2 international exports that was happening, because most of the exports was going up the island. So with the argument of whether Tobago is ready for exports, one of the things that we have to always consider that we have to, especially with the teaching, and we must create the enabling environment, and the private sector will be willing to invest. Now, even though if we expand our manufacturing sector here in Tobago, in which what we into, we have to be able to, once you see we able to trade, then basically part of the manufacturing sector, we must, some cases we have to import raw material. So one of the things that we always have to bear in mind that we must have direct access to supply, and we must have direct access to market. I mean, this is just a draft proposal, and of course it is expected that chances are the container porting and cargoing could take place in Studley Park or even in Roxburgh. That's a possibility, and Cove could be more the hub for food and manufactured goods and even other industries. So at the end of the day, we always have to be open-minded. Bear in mind that we have to consider the environment and other things. But at the end of the day, we always have to bear in mind that the enabling environment must be there. And we can't just think, well, okay, just for Tobago, we always have to cater for Trinidad, the Caribbean, and even the rest of the world. Because once the opportunities are created, people will find you. They come like when you have a product, people will find you. So at the end of the day, we have to continue the conversation, and we always have to be willing to change. The expense of change will require a lot of opposition, and we always have to be mindful of that. We have to come out of being resource rich and industrial poor. So that's my take on this.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts, for your contribution. We're moving straight into a phone call from Mr. George Stanley Baird. Mr. Baird, are you with us? Good evening.
I am. Yes, I am.
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I must compliment the new administration for taking a people's approach towards planning and development. Something people participation is very necessary for the forward movement of any society. The whole question of of refurbishing Scarborough is one which it was partly addressed in 1998. Without money, you couldn't do very much. I would just want to say this. As a Scarboroughnian myself, I have looked at, and being former Secretary of Tourism, I would do certain things differently. I will make my contributions in a written form to the panels or to those who are in authority. But I am saying it is good that the 116 square miles is now becoming visionary. Maybe we may need to put the cruise port elsewhere, as was mentioned. And we need to move away from that old British concept of loading everything in one little space. I think it would be nice if we use our land space directed by a planner, right, to really see where things are appropriate or should be appropriately placed. So it's a good beginning. I commend the team, and let us just simply work together, sharing our honest views to getting things done right, because I think this is long overdue. Thank you and have a good night.
Good night, Mr. Baird, and we thank you for calling in. We have only about 4 or 5 more questions to go. We have 3 hands on Zoom. And so I will take Mr. Dave Elliott, followed quickly by Giovanna Henry. Please keep it concise, and we'll take your comments. Dave Elliott, good evening.
Good evening, and good evening to all. I want to commend the presenters on a lovely plan. But just like my concerns are pretty much along the lines of similar to what Mr. Leacock would have been asking. I'm a marine person as well. I'm a diver, so I know the coastline. So I think the questions he asked, those are very concerning. Most of the Caribbean islands, that the map you would have shown where the anchors are on, all the Caribbean islands that actually have ports. A couple of the things that would have worked for them may not, this is probably different for us. The way our island is shaped, it makes it a bit difficult when it comes to porting facilities, how the wind blows and that type of thing. Apart from that reef, Bulldog Reef, is actually from the right of the Finger Pier all the way, from the right of the Finger Pier all the way down to Lambo. I think the question really is we didn't hear anything about that. Anything about dredging. We didn't hear anything about, even when it comes to Cove. Cove has Flying Reef, and there is Cove Reef, and there are other reefs downstream of that. So if dredging has to happen there, it will affect everything downwind of that. Has there been any considerations when it comes to those issues going forward? Thank you.
Mr. Elliott, I think Dr. Boris will comment on your question.
Yes. Well, anytime you're doing a port, you have to have the depth, probably about 15 to 20 meters deep. And the bathymetry analysis has to be done. And therefore, when that is done, you will know where it has to be dredged, etc. You don't just opt and try to create an environment that is just negative. You have to investigate as a scientist and an engineer. You have to investigate before you come up with any conclusion as to what is to be done. You can't go about saying that you're going to dredge a place that is already more than 20 meters deep. If it doesn't have the depth, then we dredge. But the investigation has to be done first. And that is what is on the drawing board, that these engineers who are going to work with the lead architect, they're going to do the investigation and indicate where should be dredged, or if you need a new shipping channel, all that has to be analyzed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boris. Giovanna or Geneva Henry. Ms. Henry, are you with us? Good evening.
Yes, hi, good evening. So let me start out by saying I'm really excited that this project is happening and that it will be in my lifetime. I've been waiting for this for some time. So as an architect, I'm all for grand modern gestures. In fact, everything I do needs to be grand. But when it comes to urban design, I'm also an urban designer. Urban design is about the delicate combination of grand architectural gestures that sing, smaller architectural gestures that support, and they all need to be connected by pedestrian traffic and public transportation. So I would like us to make sure that we consider public transport, maybe some above ground trams. If we only think about increasing area for vehicular traffic, we're gonna run into problems soon enough. The great streets of the world have a combination of life that supports life during the day and night. A great street, a great city needs to be alive day and night. So you need to have a residential, shopping, offices, nightlife, so music, theater. People need to be able to be out and about day and night. And I'm happy about the housing, I'm happy about the green corridor. However, the great streets of the world, I mean, you can pick them out easily. They have a combination within the streets. So you're gonna find a certain street size slash scale, certain building heights that works, and you're gonna have housing and offices and shopping in the same building. So I'd like to see us think about sprinkling these elements throughout the plan, as opposed to starting to program this area is for this and that area is for housing, etc. Another thing with big buildings, they could be alienating. Take Carnegie Hall, Disney Concert Hall in LA. The area is just dead except for the drop-offs for people to enter the theater. Whereas a couple blocks over, the streets are bustling because of this scale. The scale of the buildings are much smaller, and so there's a lot of life thriving over there. So we don't want only large buildings. We need a nice and artful, a delicate combination. We also don't want to block all the views of the ocean and alienate the entire population of Scarborough that exists now. We want to continue to enjoy the ocean and enjoy life as a Tobagonian, even when this new downtown comes in. So we want to make sure we consider the scale of what we do. Make sure we incorporate public transportation. I mean, so many notes, but I think we'll have more meetings and we could discuss more points later on.
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll definitely have more meetings, Ms. Henry, and you can always feel free to send us an email, interact with us via our Facebook, and share your thoughts, and we'd utilize them from there. Our final Zoom participant is Mr. Allison Williams. Mr. Williams, are you with us? Good evening. Dr. Williams, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you very much. So I want to just express my gratitude for the invitation to tonight's session. And I want to congratulate all who presented earlier this afternoon and late into the evening. I want to take this opportunity to interject some thoughts for the planners and the leaders of this development. Some of it has come out in the discussions that would have taken place and through some of the questions that would have been raised. I want to caution ourselves from trying to do too many things in a small space. Notwithstanding, I heard the intention is to reclaim land so we could have more land space. But I think we may be trying to do too many things in a small space, and it could become very congested and therefore not attractive to people using the space. We are already witnessing some of that right now in people wanting to move out of Scarborough to go elsewhere, and Crown Point seems to be the attraction now, and soon that might become an area that people will want to reject because it is becoming congested. So we have to be very careful about trying to put too many things in one place. I want to specifically look at the transportation aspect of this whole concept. I'm hearing that we want to put cruise ships. We have to cater for ships between the islands. And we want to cater for containerization. Containerization requires a lot of space. And if at all you're going to put containerization, the paraphernalia that goes with containerization on a port requires a lot of land. Tobago on its own cannot generate enough activity to justify containerization. So what we do, we look at what the globe does, and we can try to capitalize on the fact that ships and cargo travel between north and south, passing close to Tobago on the way up and on the way down. We could look also at the possibilities that exist between terminals in the east and in the west, passing again across the Caribbean, some of it passing through Panama to go from Atlantic to the Pacific and so on. And therefore, we could capitalize on some of the shipping that takes place globally if we position a port close to our airport where intermodal transshipment can take place. And therefore, we should try to avoid putting a containerized operation in the port of Scarborough that can focus mainly on passengers and have a clean, green scenario in Scarborough and put the cargo away from Scarborough and bring the benefit of having a cargo port next to the airport so you can do intermodal shipments, cargo moving from air to sea or from sea to air across the entire region through Tobago. And that can bring a kind of economy for Tobago that would allow for generation of revenues, generation of activities in the transportation and the shipping that will allow Tobago to generate its own revenues to do many other things. More than that, I hear the contributor tonight who spoke about the governance of Scarborough, indicating that for Scarborough to work, there has to be an expansion beyond what we know as Scarborough today. What he was actually saying is that we have to open up the place such that we don't congest the place. And therefore, if we take that into consideration, we should be thinking about Scarborough or the capital spanning from Bacalet right back to Crown Point. And therefore, we could put things in a way that we don't have to congest anywhere, and we could have the opportunity to connect and make for accessibility, mobility, usability, in every respect, to have the facilities that people deserve to have and have it at the high level that would allow it to last for a long time. You don't want to build something today and within 10 years, 20 years, you need to change it, you need to expand it because the thought was not there for the future. So we have to build with the future in mind. I like the idea that we are discussing this, and I think it would generate even more thoughts for the current leaders of Tobago space to think about and to incorporate going forward to make Tobago an economic place, because we cannot just use resources to build and build and build. We have to be able to generate revenues, and the revenues would not come out of Tobagonians, it would come out of the globe. If we could attract people, just like we want to attract tourists from outside, we could attract people to use a port that is operating either air or sea, and a combination of the both to make for better movement of cargo across the globe. When people order their things online today, they want it right away, you know. So if we could position warehouses and so on in the Cove, Kilgwin area, next to the airport, next to a seaport, people could order online and don't even know that the items are coming out of Tobago, but they will get it almost immediately because we have aircraft, seacraft coming in at the same point, the same hub, continuously to allow for the movement of items across the region. I think that is something that we need to think about simultaneously with a port in Scarborough that will be focused on passengers. So vessels moving between Trinidad and Tobago, vessels moving from all across the globe to Tobago to bring passengers to see, or tourists to see what Tobago is all about. That I want to leave it there for the time being, but we have to think in terms of not congesting the place even more than it is already congested.
Dr. Williams, thanks for your contribution. We know that you're always willing to share and be insightful with your information, so we know we'll hear a lot more from you as we go along in the planning process. They say that sometimes the last shall be first, but in this case, our first is last. Mr. Sean Potts is the last question I'll take from our Zoom platform. Mr. Potts, I'm going to urge you and beseech you by the mercies of God that you be very, very quick tonight. Thank you.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be second. I have a couple comments. And one is that the Scarborough is not developed because Tobago is not developed economically. So we can't say that it looks that way in abstract. It looks that way because the economy of Tobago is not developed to support it. One. The second thing I would say is looking at the diagram, and I understand that it's not something fixed. If you look at most cruise ports, you never mix it with an industrial port. So the diagram itself presented leads me to that's a non-starter. You should not have cruise ports. I've done this in Roatan. I've done it in Grand Turk, in Turks and Caicos. You develop something that brings people to the destination. You don't have an industrial port the same location. So I would ask, and something that Dr. James said, that we kind of go back to the beginning and focus on the economics of Tobago. If you're going to have a cruise port, it needs to be on the other side of the island. It's got to be from the reef up to the brain coral, and that's where people want to come and see. No tourist wants to get off and go into Scarborough. If that's going to be our commercial area. So I'm really encouraged that we're having this conversation, but I think we really need to be very serious about the economics of it. That's my last comment. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Powder, for your comment. We thank all our participants tonight for participating. We thank you for participating. We thank you for being with us. We had a few more questions online, and I know that the panelists will be made aware of what the questions, comments, and concerns were, so that as they go forward with the planning process, they'd factor those things into the process, and that the next time you are with us, some of those things may be fleshed out and discussed a little further. We meet again on March 2nd. That's next Wednesday, March 2nd. And we will meet with the tourism and environmental stakeholders. We meet at 5 p.m., 5 to 7 via the same platforms, Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. If you want to be a part of the Zoom community, you can reach out to us and register. The links are on our Facebook page. But tonight, we thank you for your contribution. We thank you for being a part of the virtual public consultation for the city of Scarborough's redevelopment. And we say good night until we see you again.
Thank you.